would now be recorded.
Okay. All right. So, welcome everybody to another evening session. This week, I'm going to be talking about something that we call avoidance behavior in our works with your kids. And obviously, the term itself, I'm sure a lot of you parents have been running into with your kids. I'm guessing maybe yourself have had some challenges with this as well. Like, so avoiding tasks and like words like procrastination are always like really on everybody's mind when it comes to like dealing with high stress, work, or learning new things. So I want to start up with a very interesting statistic, which is that about 20% of people seem to be dealing with procrastination. That's a number that has been on the rise for the last couple of years, particularly ever since COVID hit us. And what is really interesting is that students actually procrastinate 55% of the time. And then we know that this number for gifted kids is even higher, right? So it is very rare for me to run in a gifted kid that isn't procrastinating in some form or avoiding certain tasks. Because if we talk about procrastination, it's kind of like a small part of avoidance. And actually, avoidance behavior is a term that whenever I'm with Willeke, my mom as well, in classes, and we're seeing kids acting in a certain way, we would say, oh, there's a little bit of avoidance behavior there. And it triggers us looking at like, what do we need to do to help manage this? So I want to preface the avoidance behavior that it is avoidance behavior is not a flaw. Okay. That is really, really important. It is not a flaw. What it is, though, it's a signal. So, what we're saying is that when you're seeing your child not doing what they're supposed to do, or what you think they're supposed to do, that often this is a way to communicate that there is something going on, something else. And if we, as educator or as parents, treat the behavior as an actual signal that triggers ourselves to do things differently, you're more likely to help these kids avoid the avoidance behavior. So let's have a little look at like what we can see avoidance behavior is sometimes. So the most common one is procrastination or freezing. So what that means is specifically working on a task that is different than the task they're supposed to do. Now, this can take a lot of forms in terms of like games or just finding other different things, but the same actual behavior also looks like freezing, where they don't know what they're doing, right? Another thing is that what we tend to see is that what we call avoidance behavior is refusing to start or finish a task. So they're kind of two sides of the same coin. Starting tasks for us with practice, but particularly because we know that there is something at the end of the line, seems to be easier. But for a lot of the gifted kids in particular, they really, really struggle with just starting, making a decision, or making a decision to stop, to say this is enough, because that's kind of the same emotional triggers and behaviors, except they're happening at the end of a task. Excessive talking, a lot of joking, a lot of arguing, like basically causing a ruckus. Like this is very common with kids that we call challenging behavior, which is basically kids that are not adjusting socially correctly to a situation, and often create these kind of situations to distract from what needs to happen. Now, retreating into screens and books is, of course, a very, very big thing. It might be interesting to know that even Harvard now is starting to move towards a point where there is no more devices in campus. And this is interesting quote the other day, where edutech seems to be highly profitable, but not very good for education itself. I think that's a very harsh statement, but there's some truth to that. So, like screens and books might be an interesting, funny enough, like books, of course, traditionally seem like the right kind of thing to do. But avoidance behaviors with gifted kids can be that books actually get picked up like in the same way that they can procrastinate with it. Perfectionism is a very interesting form of avoidance behavior because when I was talking about it today with a few of the kids, what I'm saying is that actually when you're going into perfectionism, so not giving up on a task, and what she was saying is like, look, I'm spending a disproportionate amount of time on some tasks and then not enough on others. And it really frustrates me because I know that that's not supposed to happen. Yet this still happens and I can't let go of certain tasks. And what is happening with perfectionism is a bit of a fear of failure, of course, but there's also a bit of cognitive dissonance. So what is happening is that they have their intellect has somehow fooled themselves into believing that the stuff they're doing is the right thing to do, right? And then it's very hard to come off that belief. So there's a lot of things there that you have to do to help them, that they have to do to help themselves particularly. But I'm going to go into a little bit of detail on what you can do as a parent shortly. Now, and then the last one is emotional outbursts. So basically, instead of engaging with the tasks or doing what they're supposed to do, there is emotional outburst. And this is not always anger, although that is the more common one with the boys, particularly. But and I've had a girl who had real big difficulties with this, to be honest, where when she got into in the idea like, okay, I don't want to really be here, something isn't going quite right, she got really, really angry and upset to the point she was throwing stuff around. So it's not unique to boys, just happens a little bit more with them. But this emotional outburst could also be sadness. And we've had girls like that as well. Again, this is more likely the girls than the boys, where the task at hand was being avoided by basically creating an extreme amount of emotional outburst and crying and stuff, so that people would say, oh yeah, take your time, you don't have to engage with this, and so on. And obviously, maybe there's some more trauma there sometimes, but what is happening, of course, is that the tasks don't get done. Now, if that happens too often, that could lead to some challenges. So what lens do I want you to look through today when it comes to these kind of behaviors, right? Like, because giftedness in itself, and again, like to repeat the definition, is for me neurodivergent individuals that have the ability to learn a skill faster than 95% of the population. They're often very creative, and there's a lot of stimuli that they're overly sensitive to. So one thing that we know with gifted kids, there's a lot of work in the academic world about this, is that the gifted kids really suffer from overexcitabilities. Now, that's not unique to gifted kids per se, but actually it is definitely true that almost all gifted kids I work with have a form of an overexcitability. Another way to phrase that is that their brains are wired differently to receive more stimuli in some form. And that normally turns into certain kind of behaviors. Now, not all of these overexcitabilities manifest in the same ways in these kids, but I tend to see like 2 or 3 of them in most of them, and then it has a certain kind of, how would I say, like impact on how they do things. So, oh, that's my cat going a bit nuts. Okay, so there we go. At least they're happy, right? Okay, so what is actually happening when we're talking about the first one? So the first one is intellectual overexcitability, and that's the one that we tend to pick up on quite early in their development. Things like they look at like things very differently. Ooh, like, I want to figure out more ways to solve this. Like, can I try it this way? Is that not an answer, or doesn't it work this way? Going really deep into questioning about like other things that, you know, like most kids wouldn't be asking about. And essentially that's a good behavior, right, for in most situations. But it can actually lead to not actually doing the thing they need to do, because it's like, oh, you know, I'll show interest and, you know, this is really great, and their brains are basically looking for more and more analysis of the situation that they have, right? So they see multiple ways to solve a task. The other thing, though, is also they're often not very happy with like, oh, that's just a simple solution. This is when we see the need for like an overarching kind of reason why. Why am I doing this? What's the point? Like if I do this and it's halfway, like what's the point of that? So they want to make sure whatever they do that their solution is good enough. Other things that we can look into is that, like, instead of actually engaging, they're constantly looking at ways to avoid making mistakes, right? So they're trying to direct their brains like, how can I solve this problem, not making any mistakes, not worry about all the things that we that could make it look like we're not doing right. And yeah, so that's the first one, intellectual overexcitability. So what do you tend to see as a parent? Well, we see basically this: constant questions. Anytime you give them an instruction, there's always analysis, or like, can I do something more? They say, oh, you know what, I'm not going to try doing this because I know a better way. I'm going to find the best way. And basically, sometimes you get to the situations where they're going to argue semantics rather than actually engaging with the actual starting of the task itself. Because you can have always philosophic discussions about anything you want, if like if you're interested in something, or if you want to avoid the situation. Now, what you need to realize in this particular situation, so in the first one, is that actually what is happening in their brain is that there is too much stimulation going on. So their brain is actually like just racing ahead, right? So their brain is just running, like very fast. Like, I'm trying to draw a little brain, but the brain is basically racing ahead, trying to come up with more ways. And this is very obvious with some of these gifted kids that often speak all the time, and they think when they speak. It's when I'm doing an assessment with kids, what I often see with kids that are having these kind of overexcitability, they're narrating everything they do, even though they're not narrating it to you. They're just narrating to themselves or the voids, right? So one of the things is that the overexcitability here is the need of the brain to be thinking all the time. And if you are using these strategies, asking more questions or arguing semantics, you're basically allowing yourself to be in that constant state of curiosity, which that is the basically thing that they're looking for, right? So what you need to basically tell yourself is like, okay, this is important, not lazy, right? So they're not being lazy, they are stuck in analysis. Okay, analysis. Okay, there you go. So they're stuck in analysis. That is important, right? Because now that we know what's really going on, you can potentially come up with some strategies. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But like, what often the frame is like they don't want to do this. They're doing this on purpose. Like, I've had questions from some parents going like, okay, well, can you help them with this? Constantly like diving deeper and deeper and deeper. And what is basically going on is a bit of a misunderstanding of that there is a physical need in their brains to be analyzing things. It's one of the reasons why we want to give them harder things to do, so that they actually have to sometimes commit to saying, oh, I don't know what this is, and I need to go actually find out, right? So that's one of the things that we do in class. The second overexcitability is emotional overexcitability. So how this manifests to parents is that they tend to see like really, really big reactions to small tasks. So things that you go, oh, that shouldn't upset them so much. Like, and I have fortunately as well, because there's an upside to that too, is my youngest boy, if he feels a little bit slighted, he gets extremely angry and upset. But at the same time, he's also always looking for really fun ways to excite himself, right? And he becomes very creative as a result as well. Right, so there is other things that you see is like big tears or frustration or shutdown, like, and that can take a lot of forms as well, like sitting and just like not and staying in that. My boy sometimes sits in that for like 10-15 minutes, which is a very long time, right? Like, and he's learning how to get better with this because we are sitting with him and we're not necessarily trying to aggregate the situation, but actually helping him get out of this. But you can see this with a lot of gifted kids, and the ones that are a little bit tricky that you always have to look out for as parents are the ones that are really internalizing these kind of frustrations. Again, more common with the girls, but there's a lot of girls that just go, okay, like as long as I don't show it, people just let me go. So with the teens, this particular emotional overexcitability becomes really, really hard to detect, but it is there, right? So if you actually start talking to them and asking them particular questions around it, you'll find that actually they'll open up and say, yeah, like I don't know what's going on at these points. And we see this a lot with kids that, like when they're doing tests, for example, that they blank out, and that's the extreme version of it. And then we call it now test anxiety. But technically, the test anxiety is the same kind of fear of not doing things as the avoidance behavior of things like homework and so on. So these things are very, very closely related. Right. So basically, what you tend to see with these kids, these emotional overexcited kids, is that the way they avoid is by, not doing any tasks that are linked to failure that has happened in the past or that they perceive to be very likely to happen again. So it is very clear that the experience that they've had in the past versus how the experiences sort of shape in the future, they're very closely linked. And unfortunately, and for the kids that I work with here, I need to really help them understand that in order to get over that, they have to actually face those kind of bad memories. One way that I explain this to a lot of kids is that memories are formed, and then whenever you recollect a memory, the situation in which you recollect the memory adds to the memory. So we don't constantly like remember only one thing. Where you are at that point has an impact on that. The state of mind where you're in, particularly the emotions that you feel at the same time, are important. And a good way of explaining how this works is how funerals function. So when somebody passes away, which is sad, then what we do is we create a very nice environment around it where we remember the nice things of that person to reduce the emotional impact of grief. And grief is one of those emotions that we have to really lean on people around us to manage, because if we don't, then it's an emotion we don't run into often enough. Right, so it's a really strong sadness emotion that has a lot of impact on people, particularly on if the person that passes away is a partner or a close mom. So not managing that is very important. And unfortunately, because of the way our schools sometimes throws our kids into situations with the test at an early age when they don't have that many other memories, these kind of memories can be quite traumatic in some cases for them. So what you tend to see with the kids that are like avoiding from emotional overexcitability because they're scared to fail, there's a lot of stuff to unpack there. So this avoidance is a way for them to protect their brains from making more of those bad memories. It's why a lot of people that have suffered really traumatic experiences sometimes don't remember them, because the brain cannot cope with too much of this particular kind of emotion. Now, and I know it sounds a bit like, oh, isn't that like very hyperbolic? It shouldn't be, but unfortunately for gifted kids, because of the way their brains function, it is likely that they experience these emotions just much more intensely. Therefore, like it is sometimes as bad as a traumatic experience. And that once you understand that, maybe that will help you. That the avoidance, when it's dealing with emotional overexcitability, is actually self-protection. So this is self-protection in their mind, right? So that is the key reframe for this one. Now, the next one I haven't actually spoken a lot about this in a lot of my other sessions yet, is the imaginational overexcitability. So the in a sense, what is really happening here is what you see daydreaming. Right? So you kids thinking about the universe, the world. These are the kids that are telling stories. So like I've seen kids where you ask them, can you even in assessments already, they go and they say, oh, I'll make a drawing. And then in the assessments, we do that to see what their creativity is like. Some of the kids will, instead of drawing things, will just explain what they're seeing in their head, and because of that they're actually not drawing at all. So they'll end up like, oh, I ran out of time, so they put one or two lines down, and then in the computer model that we use, they're obviously they wouldn't pop up as very creative, but they've just probably told me a whole story about what everything is and where things are going. So obviously the imagination is there. And what you tend to see with kids like this is that they are often very keen to reach out and ask and talk about things, and contemplate what other things could be, or they actually do draw instead of actually doing things. So there'll be people drawing stuff around the actual assignment that they need to do. Um, or they like to build things, or they fantasize, and all of the stuff that they can do to avoid the task. So games like Minecraft, unfortunately, are very good at sort of combining those two things. So yeah, like be careful with that. Like honestly, it's one of the hardest things that we have to do, to take away the iPad sometimes, to help the kids not get too overexcited. So what is happening here is that there is a need for the brain to find a world that is richer than the actual world around them. So there's a need for stimulation that the brain is looking for. It can't find it anywhere else, so it starts to daydream. And then, because of the way that they can memorize things and move forward in their thought processes, it's an infinitely more interesting world often, right? So the way that that we say that this is happening is like, this is actually not disengagement. Like, so we say, look, this child is not doing the task, so therefore it's disengaging. But technically they are engaging. Often they are engaging with the actual subject matter in their head, right? So it is still happening. They're still thinking about stuff. However, like maybe the best way to reframe this is to say, okay, they're actually not avoiding effort, right? They're looking for engagement somewhere else. Like, so they're choosing meaning here. So something more important to them, but it looks like that they're not doing anything. So what is kind of unfair is that if they're asking a question in class, ask a question in class about planets, for example, and they start thinking about, wow, okay, like Pluto is no longer a planet, it's a dwarf planet. There's other small, like, and he goes like all the way into his mind about all the things that he or she has learned about the universe, and they miss the question that's being asked is like, oh, how many planets are in the solar system, right? So we could argue and say, oh, they were not engaged in class, but we don't know that always. Like, very often they are very, very engaged, just somewhere else. So they're looking for meaning in this case. Now, the fourth one is also a fun one, the psychomotor overexcitability. So this is, of course, like the very common, like hopping in the chair, constantly grabbing and moving stuff. They constantly need breaks from little things, stints of sitting down and doing stuff. Anything is about like making movement or putting some noise out, basically. And yeah, they're not sitting down. That's the most common version of this. And they won't do repetitive tasks. So it's like, I've done this before, that's okay, I'm out. And this is obviously the one that is really common as young as with the younger kids, because like that is normal with little kids as well. Just with gifted kids, this need is so much higher. But when we talk about kids that need these kind of breaks, these are the ones that often get misunderstood for ADHD. Right. So this is one where you as a parent, sometimes we go, oh, maybe there is some ADHD. It isn't. Like ADHD has some of similar characteristics, but we know that the reasons this happens in their brains is very, very, very different. Right. So don't worry. You still have to do a lot of the same stuff that you have to do to help them deal with this. But with gifted kids, it's often about finding something very interesting to do, right? So their body is basically needing regulation to create enough stimuli in their brain so that they can actually do things. And what is very interesting in these situations is that the avoidance in this case is actually not avoiding the task. Often the moving around is needed to do the task. Right. So this one is one actually in class where we sometimes tell teachers to be a little bit more lenient with like the rules in terms of moving around and such. When I do my assessment with the kids, I ask them, like, do you want to sit, like, particularly if I see that they're a bit restless, I ask them, do you want to do this particular part on the floor? Do you want to walk around a bit? And then we discuss things as they're walking around. Now, one of the most famous people in the world was really well known for this particular overexcitability, which is Albert Einstein. So he would go on these walks in order to be able to speak to people. So if you wanted to have his full attention, you needed to go on a walk with him. If you would ask him to sit still in front of you, you'd probably get like 10% of him. And that's very common with the kids that we have. So obviously we have to be mindful that like the walking around can have an impact on other kids that don't have this need. And that is where a little bit of the difficulty in managing classes or kids comes in. But again, like I think the important reframe of kids that are constantly moving around is that they're not actually trying to avoid, they're trying to increase avoidance. But maybe we're the one that are stopping them being able to do so. Right. So that is a very important key frame. So that is here, basically. In this case, stillness might, it's not always the case, by the way, increase like avoidance. Right. So asking them to sit still makes it worse. Okay. Now, the last overexcitability that I want to talk to, there is a few more, by the way, but I don't think they are quite relevant in the context of what we're doing here. Although there's one that I will speak about that is kind of fun. But the last one I'm speaking here is sensual. So not the well, the one we're talking about is the one about sensory engagement, right? So the sensual overactivity comes from lots of different places, but what we tend to see is that they're often trying to avoid certain situations or locations, right? So they don't want, or they're very sensitive to certain kind of materials that they don't like. That they'll say, oh, like what we tend to see with these kids is that, for example, the tags in the back of their shirt, in their shirts, they're extremely sensitive to them. You have to cut them out, and because else they won't wear the shirts. And to the point where you go, like, I don't quite understand what's going on. So again, it's like their brains are picking up these signals much quicker. This could be in the form of sensitivity to smell. Willeke Rol, my mom, is like really like whenever people have very strong perfume, like it affects her so much that she really can't do anything at that point. Like starts sneezing, like it's like it seems almost like an allergy, but she's been tested for it and she's not actually allergic to it at all. So this is one of those things that we see with a lot of kids that that often like don't like the sound of the classroom and so on. So like they will complain about like, this is too noisy, I can't do this, or like this is too much light, and a lot of them actually end up with headaches and things like that too, right? So and the way that they cope with this is the resistance. But I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I can't do it. This is too much. This hurts. This I don't feel well. Right. So that is the behavior you tend to see around sensual overexcitability. But you have to see it, this is not like them not wanting to do the task. They're not doing this because they're trying to avoid it. They're doing it because they're sensorily overloaded, right? Um, and in this case, like often it's like the situation is noisy and messy, and then they have to do a task that is maybe a little bit difficult. The task triggers like frustration, or it's a task that is a little bit boring, and that triggers other kind of frustrations. And then you add those things all together, and they go, I'm shutting down. I can't do this. And this is obviously something that happens with adults as well on occasion. Like burnout behavior has a lot of that too, right? So we know that these things are real. They're not like fictional. They're not people crying about that, like just to avoid doing some work. Like psychiatrists and psychologists spend a lot of time managing that kind of stress. So the difference is that these gifted kids sort of run into that stress much, much earlier, right? And that is where they really have difficulty, right? So what is important here is that behavior here is actually a communication. So this is them like telling us it's too much. That's what they're doing, right? So if you have a child that can get a little bit anxious around like certain kind of like sensational overexcitabilities, when that happens, you have to understand that they're not actually saying it to avoid it. They're probably saying it because there's too much going on, right? And obviously, like helping to fix that one is technically a lot easier than just telling them just do it, right? Because if I were to take you and I would put like 120 decibel speakers next to you and I say, oh, can you please do your taxes right now? It's probably going to be a bit hard, right? So you would say, okay, let's switch off that sound, right? So sometimes the sound of a certain like an aircon could trigger that with some of these kids, right? So we have to be mindful of that and figure out like what it is that we can do to help them in this case. So now the funny thing with this is like technically a lot of the way that we look at this is that some of the stuff that we just spoke about is about coping with the overexcitabilities. However, some of it is about indulging in it, right? So they like it too much. So when you look at the intellectual and the imaginational and the psychomotor, it's actually about indulgence. When you look at like the sensual and the emotional, it's more about coping. Although there is a little bit of an overlap in each of these. So which one of the two is it? That is always a bit of a question that you need to ask yourself. And we are teaching the kids in our sessions language along the lines of being able to understand this. So obviously this is a little bit more tricky with some of the younger kids, but basically in our effective time sessions with the kids, these topics come up. And the aim here is to give them more language so that they understand what is going on, so that they can explain the same thing. And but as they get older and as teens, they can say to themselves, "Ooh, which one am I running into? One of my overexcitabilities? Do I really need to make some adjustments?" Because there is these are general, and the situations that trigger them can be quite specific. So there is not like this one size fit all strategy for a lot of things. I'll give a bit of an example of like what you could do to help later. But what is really important is that you have to understand that these things here take a lot of practice to understand. Like particularly the overindulgence is actually not that easy to catch for yourself. And if it was, we wouldn't have that many people with gaming addictions or other kind of addictions. So like gifted kids are unfortunately a lot more susceptible to these kind of addictions than other kids are. So the coming back a little bit towards the idea of avoiding certain things, like I'm starting, like I used to be a bit more on the fence, but the more I'm working with these kids, the more I feel that the way that we have to allow these kids to engage with particular technology, we have to be really, really careful. And the best thing that I always can say is that even Steve Jobs didn't let these kids touch an iPad until they were 16. So there is that, like the guy who wouldn't say he invented it, but responsible for the iPad itself, didn't let his kids use it. So that maybe says a lot. So what do we do at home? What are the home tips, right? So where do we start? Because I actually think a big problem is, again, is that we try to fix these things instantly. And I don't think that is a really fair ask, because what we are starting to see is that, one, the need is a physiological one, right? And it's triggered by emotional distresses, generally speaking, whether it's actually overexcitement of joy, but or anger or fear, right? So we are talking about real deep behavioral change here that we need to help enact. And in Passend education, we say, okay, we cannot actually work on any of those skills if the kids are not happy first. So happy is in Maslow's hierarchy is the love and belonging part. Again, their brains are firing on overdrive. Their emotions are running wild. They're asynchronously developing in their emotional ability often. So you talk to them and it feels like you're talking to a 10-year-old, but they are maybe still 6-year-old, and their emotional level is actually at 6, sometimes even worse, because they've skipped important steps in their development. So we need to work on being happy. And that actually, in this particular situation, is about regulation. Right. So what is happiness? There's three elements to it. The first one is well-being. And then well-being is actually the two. You have the actual physical well-being, like how do you feel your body, broken arms and all that kind of stuff. It's like very hard to be happy if you just broke your arm and everything hurts. There is obviously the mental well-being, or the affective well-being, as we call that. So this is all about your own internal struggles about feeling well in your head. So a lot of family interactions and kids are involved in this. This is obviously, as a parent, where you have a lot of say. So these two make up a big part of being happy. But the other part of being happy is actually agency. So choice, can I do what I need to do? And responsibility. Ability. Okay, yeah. Responsibility. And that's actually kind of interesting. If you are asked to do things against your will all the time, you are unhappy. Most people don't like that, right? That's pretty obvious. So the opposite of being told what to do is agency. And once that sort of clicks, you go, oh, actually, that is interesting. So we need to give them agency. But agency, where you say you can do whatever you want, actually, for a lot of kids, is really hard. So if I tell them, I have kids that if I tell them, oh, choose a project you want, and we could wait for days and nothing will come out of it. Similarly, when you ask them what you want to do when you grow up, nothing will come out of it. They will say, I have no idea. I don't know what university to choose. I don't like, so there's avoidance behavior around like what their goal needs to be. That's actually one of the biggest one we don't really tackle. We had a very long discussion the other day with my team about, like, how do we measure this? Like, what is something that we know that the kids have a goal? And then we started looking at every one of the kids that we have, and it's like 100 kids right now. And we go, okay, so does anybody know right now what that kid's goal is? And we came to a conclusion that actually for a lot of them, that goal just doesn't exist. Not that we don't know what they would want. It's that they don't know what they don't want. And some of them are telling us what they think the parents want. So there's a lot of like Chinese whispers and telephone line, the confusion there, because when you then ask them to explain what that means, they don't really have a clue. But there's some of them that know that they need to make these choices, but they just don't know what to do. So the bit here with that kind of choice is that, like, technically, you can't just have agency. You also need to have responsibility, and responsibility is, to me, I define that as having an impact on people that you care about around you, right? And particularly the responsibility we're looking for is the one that we can positively affect. So I choose to do something and then see that to conclusion, and then it has a positive impact around us, which is like these can be very, like, I like it to see this with kids, for example, that say, oh, I want to cook for the family, and then they try to do their best and they make like an egg, and then the joy and excitement and happiness that comes out of that fulfillment is really interesting, and there's a lot of responsibility in there, and often they choose to cook at that point. Whereas if you tell them everybody has to cook every day, every other day once or whatever, then they'll, I don't want to do it, right? So like there's a responsibility is never really given, it's taken, right? So they have to do this, which again leads to that particular agency. So this is important because I think when we're talking about like these overexcitabilities, we have to take both of these into consideration, because we only work on the well-being and we neglect the agency and the responsibility, they will not be happy. And if they're not happy, the chances that they're susceptible to fear and anger and frustration and all these kind of things goes up, right? So it makes it so that it's harder for them to regulate their emotions. Once they're in an emotional state, it's almost impossible for them to deal with the stuff that is basically their homework or their coursework or whatever that is, because like all those things, the next two stages on this are basically yeah, that's where the schools come in. So these are the the esteem and the actualization, like actualization. So these stages cannot happen unless you're that's what schools tend to focus on these tops here, and the homework sits in that particular bit here. Nobody is getting homework to become more happy, right? That's not really where that sits. So we're trying to skip a run basically, and there is obviously residual happiness from a lot of the kids that have amazing families and all that kind of stuff. So maybe they can let go of this. But what we tend to see is that like particularly with this is the thing with the girls a lot. Unfortunately, is they crop this up inside. There's this anger and frustration, this lack of control goes inside, and then they retreat in some of these, right? And if this is the imaginational stuff in the middle where they're not engaging, or like the basically the intellectual where they start becoming perfectionistic in things, that's when we start losing these kids often, right? So we need to work on regulation, and this is much like going to the gym. So you're really talking about like getting stronger, right, at stuff, right? So much stronger. There you go. Because you need to train a muscle, right? So you like if you want to be really good and at not losing control when you're having fun, you have to have fun more. If you want, the same for anger, the same for sadness, the same for disgust. Like if you want to deal with something you don't like that is disgusting, you get over it through exposure therapy. So there is all these things here, and that's essentially where you as a parent can come in, right? So regulation in this case is exposure. So look at it this way: the actual avoidance happening and the stress that comes out of that is good. It allows you to let them run into situations that they have to get used to. What we're a little bit poor at as parents sometimes is letting them run into the consequences of those actions. So we tend to try to save them from that. And obviously, there's often a lot of trauma from ourselves in that, like, oh, we don't want to have this happen. But like, I'll give you a very interesting example sometimes about giving kids agency, even though that it's a little bit dangerous, is my son at one point decided that like he didn't need his floaters to swim. And he said, "Dad, I'm going to swim in the deep end." This is when he was like, I don't know, 3.5, 4 years old or something like that. And I said, well, you're not allowed to. You don't know how to swim yet. And he's like, no, I'm going to go into the pool. It's going to be fine. And then he took off his stuff, and he was adamant this is going to happen. And of course, I said, well, you know what? You jump in, and then see what happens, right? And obviously, I would stand very close, like making sure that like I could yank him out the moment things would go wrong. Because maybe he learned how to swim behind my back. Who knows? It was unlikely. But he stood there, very brave, jumped in, and of course, he went under, couldn't get up. And there was people trying to immediately save him, even before he had a chance to go under. And I was looking at it, and I wanted to basically prove a point to him, but it's like this is dangerous, right? So I gave it a second, and there was a mom behind it that was trying to go there, and behind another mom was a dad that saw me do this. He went like, no, he stopped his wife. He said, no, this is okay, because I think he heard our conversation. He knew exactly what's going on. So like 1 or 2 seconds where I could see a little bit of a shock, pulled him out, and he was obviously distressed. So I hugged him and said, okay, look, like, what did you learn from this? And he said, no, yeah, I'm sorry, I can't swim. I said, no, look, I don't mind you trying new things, but if I say, look, this is dangerous, you have to work with me. And to be honest, like ever since then, particularly around the swimming experience, whenever there's a bit of danger there, he listens. There's definitely like I said, like I'm always there to catch you, right? But if you want to try dangerous new things, make sure that I will go in, and he still isn't scared to try new things with me as a result, right? So obviously that defiance that came with him, we have to do the same with the homework. And this is why it's kind of important that in primary school, that particularly year 1 to 5, like we let them make mistakes, we let them run into certain consequences. We try to engineer situations where if they don't do what they're supposed to do, it actually has an impact on certain stuff, where they might not be able to join certain things, or they lose stuff, which is one of the good reasons actual competition itself is kind of good. The only difference is like I'm not a big fan of competition in the school itself, like all the time. Like, okay, here's grades, let's compete against each other, who's the best in class, because there's no choice in that. They're forced to be in school, and therefore there is no agency. But if I am a big fan of lots of competitions, like going, like asking them, okay, what kind of sport do you want to do? Do you want to join a chess competition? Do you want to join a math competition? Like all those kind of things, those are really big in favor of, because those are situations where you could give them a choice. They can engage with these, like these fears, and then they can get better at it. Now, what do we need to do then with this? Like, so, like for example, if the avoidance behavior gets in the way of getting stuff done, like you have to sort of create situations where certain things that they want to do can only happen if the actual behaviors that they need to do have happened. So this could be things like cleaning out the dishwasher, or doing the dishes, or doing the homework. And you can say, okay, and this is where devices and other kind of things can actually help you a bit, because you can just go, okay, you can only get your time if all the other stuff is done, and if not, that's too bad. And what you then do is you have to be very consistent and firm about that. So you have to help them regulate. So if they get upset and angry about it, say, yeah, that's fine, I get it. Like sit with them, let them calm down. Once they are done saying, oh, it's nice that you calm down, and they're like, yeah, but I really want to play this, or I really want to do that. And then it's like, yeah, I understand. Like if you need help with not doing the task tomorrow, or the next day, or whatever, you can have that time, right? So it's not a punishment. Because that's if you say, look, if you don't do this, I take this away. You said you are capable of managing your own time to get done, so you can do this thing. It's just that nobody's allowed to play a computer game after 8 o'clock, and I will not switch it on until the tasks are done. That's it. So that's not a punishment, it's a natural consequence. If you're firm with that, like when you do this early, they will learn later, right? And what kind of avoidance there is one of these 5, basically. So like again, like if they are like super sad, you you tell them, hey, you know what, if you need more ways to calm down, I can help you, but right now, unfortunately, you didn't complete your task as a result. And that can often happen if they have to hand in a an art project or something. So but the kids that are often perfectionists, we tend to help them in the last moment, like, okay, now we're going to help you make sure, because we're so worried about them maybe getting that one grade for that thing. I've got a lot of parents that I see kids working on a project and they are absolutely not finishing it. And then the next week they come back and they have like a whole project done. I know the parents have done this. But what actually happened there is that you've taken the, when they don't finish a project in a class, they have to present in front of class to everybody why it didn't finish. And that obviously happens once, and then they feel frustrated about that. Then this and they see other kids going, oh, that's actually a very nice presentation. Often the kids that they kind of dismiss, and then they go, oh, I want to do the same thing. Now we have no grades, there's no best in class, none of that stuff. It's just literally like, okay, you give your own grade to yourself. What do you think you did? And they'll normally very honest, actually. They'll be like, like, I didn't do that well. So that's like a C. And then we ask the class if, particularly if they grade themselves too low, we ask the classes that do they agree. And most of them will go, no, actually, it's much better. This was really nice. Or if they didn't do it, then people are kind of quiet and the kids know. Right. So we need to create situations where that consequence happens. And I think like this is hard as a parent because obviously you don't want to see your kids fail, but you need to actually normalize failure early on so that when they start doing amazing things, when they choose to do things, right? Because like in kindergarten, primary school, there's not a lot of choice. All the subjects they do sort of follow standard kind of thing. There's a little bit more choice as they get into secondary, but it's still quite limited, right? So like ideally letting them run into these challenges early on is really, really important. Right. So once the regulation happens, so once they learn how to actually deal with the emotions, and again, like any overexcitability they need to get used to. So helping them get through it and then talking about that. So you were walking around a lot. So yeah, I don't know what's going on. So, okay, well, like yeah, that didn't make you finish this thing. Yeah, that was so frustrating. Okay, well, what do you need next time? Oh, maybe I need like a little break, or you can suggest things like taking a little break in between. So that can help you with a little timer, so that like every 10 minutes you get like a 2-minute break, and then you do some stuff, get the energy out, and then you come and sit down and do it again. And as you do that, they get better and better. So one version of this that we have is a card with, I think it is 10 strips on it. And we ask the kids, how many breaks do you want today? Like you can have anyone, as many as are on this card, but you can also have less. So how many you want to try for today? And they will go like, you know what, I will need 7. I say, okay, that's fine. 7, right? And every time that they feel they need a little break, they just tick off the on the card that they've taken a break. And as long as they have breaks left, it's fine. But we don't actually care if they take more or less. But ideally, when they see the breaks, they'll try not to take all of them. So they're gonna naturally push themselves to try and deal with that. And then next day we ask them, they'll say, actually, I think I can do 6 today. And sometimes they come back, so, oh, it was such a difficult day. Like like everything was like I had to sit still here. We had like an assembly and I wasn't allowed to move. Like I don't think I can do 6. I need 8. Now, once they get to that level of understanding of themselves, like they will start really, really like going down. Eventually, they don't need a card anymore. So you could actually take one of these cards. Like they look very simple, just like something like this, and then like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it's just breaks. That's it. And we laminate this, and then we just ask them, okay, how many do you want? And we just do a little razor marker tick on it, and then just wipe it off as they use it. Simple as that. You can make this at home. If you have a kid that can't sit still, put this in place. I can guarantee you they'll make a little game out of it to try and not run out of breaks, and you'll actually help them go through it. So this is a really good technique that we use. What is important is that every time the regulation happens, your job is to basically go, okay, that was frustrating, that didn't quite work, or I can see you were daydreaming. What were you thinking of? Oh, a lot. Did that help you get the task done? No, it didn't. Okay, well then, like, take a breath, Now going to the re-engagement part. Like what do you want to do? Like how many minutes do you need to get this finished? So set some goals with them. And the goals shouldn't be finished or not. They should be things like, okay, how much time do you need? Like, so how long do you want to work for? 10 minutes. Okay, 10 minutes. We'll try to sit down for 10 minutes, then take your break. Now, what is interesting is that if you disconnect the amount of work that has to be done on the task itself, you also relieving the stress and pressure of it, which often deals with a lot of the overexcitabilities and fears in doing it. So, and if that becomes a habit, so they can say, oh, 10 minutes, and then say, oh, you know what, it'll be fun to see if in 10 minutes you can do half a chapter or 5 questions or whatever that is, right? And they will start to do more and more and more and more, right? So, so that is basically one way that you can really help them, by basically saying, okay, like set a time limit, right? So time, not the task itself. Because what tends to happen with these kids when you say, oh, I want you to finish a whole chapter, the reason they're procrastinating is because that whole chapter is too much for them or too difficult for them. So if you say, I just want you to try for 10 minutes to work on it, and it doesn't matter how far you get, you take some of the pressure off. So that's a really important one. Now, and then finally, when the re-engagement has happened and they are busy, this is a really, really important step. We don't do enough of this in schools, and definitely as parents, probably not enough as well. We have to positively reinforce that behavior. So we need to give them some extra dopamine. Do this. Can you guys hear me now? Yep. All good. I'll try one more time with this. If not, okay, we'll do it next way. So what we'll do, I think it's the end of the actual hour. Are there any questions at the moment from me in the chat? Or if does somebody want to raise their hand? So I went through a lot of stuff, so let's recap this a little bit. As we said, avoidance is a signal, it's not a flaw. There's lots of versions of it, but we are looking for these overexcitabilities. The behaviors that we see, like asking a lot of questions, getting over emotional, daydreaming, running around, being over stimulated by sound, they are the behaviors we see are there to avoid these kind of situations, to avoid either the fear of the actual task or indulge in a need that they currently have, that they need to get out of the system before we can continue, right? So are they coping, or is there indulgence? We need to have some empathy in that, so we have to help them with regulation, then the re-engagement, positively reinforce, and then tips at home is to help them with their happiness so that they have more resilience against the emotions going through them. They have to practice them, so we don't help too much, right? Because that is not good. We need to let them run into their consequences. And then for the ones that need movement breaks, make a little card where they can set the number of breaks they can take, and set a time, not a to-do goal for them. And you'll see their improvement happening. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. We'll have another session like this next week. Again, if you need any more, if you want to answer any questions answered, please put them in the form. And thank you very much for coming, everybody. Wish you all a very, very Good evening. Sonia, you didn't plug it in. So stupid.
Your phone?
Yeah.
The meeting stopped?
Yeah.
Are you gonna continue it? Are you gonna continue the meeting?
Mm-hmm.